Amy at EuroLuxHome.com. Welcome back to YouTube. If you enjoy learning about European antiques, be sure to like this video, subscribe, and maybe even leave a comment. It really helps a small business. So I thought it might be really interesting to explore the theme of the jester or joker or fool, because we often find this character carved in some of our antique furniture, like this piece behind me. Now, the word jester actually comes from the French word gesture, which means storytelling. And that was one of the main roles of the jester, or the joker, or the fool, was amusement, as well as social commentary. So let's look back at the history. Where did the role of the jester come from? So we do find evidence all the way back that jesters actually entertained the Egyptian pharaohs as well as the Roman emperors. So we do have a history going far back, but the actual popularity of jesters or jokers or fools really began to rise in the Middle Ages in Europe, around the 5th century, all the way up through the 16th century. That was really the rise of the jester. And the jesters, there wasn't a particular training or school that they would go to. Sometimes it was taught by a family member and the job might be inherited or passed on, but often people would go to fairs or festivals, like this character right here. So right here is a good example of, we have the character of a jester. He is in a Renaissance village, we see behind him, and he is approaching a wealthy merchant. And we see that this is a wealthy merchant who's pulling a donkey, that's his little cart is filled with vegetables and fowl and all kinds of things. And so the jester is coming up to him in the hopes of gaining a job at the home of this nobleman by telling stories and singing songs. So he has his lute here, and he's actually dressed in quite a distinctive costume. And so the ultimate goal, of course, was for a jester to land a job in a royal court. That would be the best job possible. And as I mentioned, they had very distinctive costume. It normally was bright colors, a whole outfit in bright colors, with a cap that had bells on it. And if we come in and look at our little sculptures of our jesters here that are actually acting as pillars for this piece of furniture, we see that he has a little costume, he has a collar on, his little hat, and he even has bells on his hat. And this character has a bit of a snoot on his face, but if we look over to this one, we have a nice big smile. So just a really interesting way to see how the costume is conveyed in wood itself. Now, we have stories that have come down to us through history of famous jesters, and we have a pair that were named Triboulet and Will. And we actually have the story of them in the Song of Roland, which is pictorially exhibited in the Bayeux Tapestry. Now, the Bayeux Tapestry tells the story of the Norman conquest by Norman the Conqueror of England in 1066. And these jesters are actually mentioned, and they actually fought on the battlefield as well as entertained the troops. And it is remarkable that Triboulet, his name is actually embroidered on the Bayeux Tapestry as being one of only 4 very minor characters to actually have his name on the tapestry. So very interesting. So let's go look at another piece and we'll continue to explore the history of the jester. So I'm in front of yet another antique Renaissance buffet that up at the top has a charming figure of a jester. So the jester's primary job was to entertain, to amuse the king or the powerful family where he had a job. And he did that through a lot of skill. They often were very adept at acrobatics and juggling. and storytelling and singing and really just making people laugh. You know, the power of laughter is a powerful thing. And if you've ever stayed up all night laying in bed scrolling through TikTok laughing at cat videos, you know that sometimes you just need to laugh. And so that was the role of the jester, his primary role. But he also had another job, which was satire. And he used wit and wordplay and double entendre to actually be a social critic, to bring up societal issues, but in a clever way. And sometimes they would even make fun of the court and the king, but that was a very fine line to walk. So I'll give you another example of a famous jester, and perhaps this is our jester up above, of Triboulet. And he was employed by the French court of Louis XII and Francis I in the 16th century. But the story goes that one day he pushed it a little too far and he greatly offended Francis I. And Francis I said, "Okay, because you are my jester, I will allow you to choose the manner of your death." And Triboulet responded immediately, "Then I choose to die by ripe old age." And he made the king laugh, and the king said, "Okay, I won't put you to death, but you're exiled from the court." So at least his wit saved him that day. So let's go look at another piece, and we'll continue talking about the jester. I forgot to tell you that Triboulet, perhaps our character of Triboulet from the French court in the 16th century, was actually written about by Victor Hugo, the novelist. He wrote a play about him in the 19th century. And then Verdi actually created an opera based on this character as well, the famous opera of Rigoletto. We are in front of another antique Renaissance bookcase that features a jester. And we'll start all the way down here because we have this little whimsical figure of the jester with his little shoes and his hat. And here's his little hand. He's actually holding up this whole column on his head. So really part of the fun or the play of the jester even put into this piece of furniture. And then up at the top, we have the jester leaning over the top of the piece, really creating a very playful atmosphere. So besides being their primary job was to entertain and also to be a satirist or poke fun at culture and society and possibly even the king, their third job was sometimes to be a confidant, to really almost be a very treasured close friend of the king. And that is the role that Will Sommers played with King Henry VIII in his court in England in the 16th century. Now, Will Sommers, perhaps this is Will Sommers depicted up here above us, but Will Sommers, not only did he amuse the king, did he poke fun at the nobles of the court and the king himself, but he actually was considered to be a sounding board for King Henry VIII. He attended many important meetings, government meetings, and it was thought that King Henry VIII really appreciated the unfiltered advice that came from someone who wasn't one of his advisors and could act in the role of a friend. Now, Will Sommers had a very long and successful career in the court of Henry VIII, even though it was a very dangerous place, because historians today know that Henry VIII put quite a few people to death. And there's a wide range. Well, we count from 2,000 up to 70,000, which is a huge, big difference in numbers. But they say it depends on if someone was actually executed or if they just died while they were awaiting execution or were tortured. So there's different ways to count how many people died. But what we can all agree on was it was a very dangerous place to have a job in the court of Henry VIII. But Will Sommers was the good confidant of Henry VIII for many, many years, and that's why he still lives on in ballads today. English ballads still mention the role of Will Sommers as one of the most popular jesters. So we have one more piece to go look at. So here we are in front of our fourth antique Renaissance style buffet. This one has a little bit different shape. It's open, but up at the top, again, we have our theme of the jester leaning over the piece of furniture, and he's smiling. He has his bells on his hat and his collar, and then there's two little smaller figures of jesters underneath. So I have been referring to the male jester throughout our discussion today, but you might be interested to know that there were actually some female jesters. Not very often, but the most famous female jester was Mathurine, and she was French and served in the French court in the 17th century. She actually served three kings, Henry III, Henry IV, and Louis XIII. And she is said to have been very tall, and she dressed like an Amazonian warrior. So she wore great big flowing robes with armor, and she had a shield and a great big sword, and that was all part of her act that she would put on. And the kings were said to just really enjoy her company. And she comes down through history for her bravery as well as her comedy. It is said that there was an assassin that tried to attack Henry IV, and she actually captured the assassin and held him until the guards could come and arrest him and take him away. So a woman who was not only funny, but brave. And then by the 18th century, we really see that the role of the jester or the fool falls out of favor, and you don't find that role so often in the aristocratic courts any longer. And so in case you are looking at antique furniture, European antique furniture that has jesters or fools on it, now you know a little bit more about the history of the role of the jester. So I hope you found it really interesting to learn a little bit of the history of the jester. If I can answer any questions, please feel free to reach out or leave them in the comments below. Like this video, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.